Welcome to the Supported Living Property Podcast with your host, me, Lisa Brown, the place to learn about supported living property investing. Hi Simon, it's great to have you here today. How are you?
Very good, thank you, Lisa. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. I'm good. For people who don't know you, do you want to introduce yourself and say a bit about you?
Yeah, so I'm Simon Cook. I'm one of the directors at a company called Seco Support, which is a small but national supported living company. We support people with learning disabilities, autism and mental health difficulties, but with sort of added complexities. So it might be offending behaviour, challenging behaviour. I'm a learning disability nurse and CBT trained. I'm 37 now. I've been in the profession since I was 16, worked my way up from a support worker. So I've kind of done every level on the way up. So we've been going for about 2.5 years now, primarily in Brighton, the Midlands and the North East and Gloucestershire. So we're slowly getting there, Lisa.
Fantastic. And one of the things we're talking before we came on about the whole range of different subjects we could cover in this and how are we going to cram it into 25 minutes, weren't we? But I think one of the things I'd like to sort of focus on is when you say that you're a complex provider, what do you actually mean by that? And just kind of help people to understand a little bit more in depth and what that actually means.
Yeah, so I mean, complex for us is if I'm being honest with you, it's usually when most people run away from the situation, will gravitate towards it. It's people where it might be high profile. There might be sort of psychological complexities, trauma, a complex situation that they're in hospital. We don't, to put it in a different sort of way, we don't really support Doris to go to the shops, if I'm being honest. We support people who find it very difficult to live in the community due to a number of reasons. The complexity for us isn't medical conditions, so peg feeding, sort of trackies and things. That's kind of not our bag. It's more the psychological complexity, to be honest.
And I think there's a real lack of understanding around what that actually means and how that is, the work behind it, really, isn't there? I think, from the stuff you were saying. What do you think are the real challenges at the moment for being a service provider providing this kind of in-depth stuff?
The obvious answer is a lack of finance, a lack of money in the sector, and I think we're all aware of that. But I think there's other things we can do to make this easier and to make our lives a bit easier within this sector. We're in a very, very specialist part of the sector. So supported living, it's small, but it's large in the same time, but the complex part of supported living is very, very small. I think I heard someone say the other day it's like kind of the top 3% that you're supporting. I don't know if that's an accurate percentage, but this was a commissioner that said it to me. So I mean, there's a number of things that I think we could do better, or the authorities could do better. A lot of it is around education, if I'm being honest. So a better understanding of what complex support is. An example of that would be, naturally, we have more safeguardings, we have more incidents, we have the police contacted more. This happens, because the person's complex. It's often seen as very negative. It's often seen as you're failing, you're not doing well. Actually, no, by definition, that this is going to happen. Education would be a big one for me.
And that's, I think, from what you're saying there as well, is education amongst professionals who maybe people like the property investors listening would assume that the professionals within the local authority understood that, and within CQC and stuff understood that would be the nature of the work, but that's not necessarily what you're finding, is it? No,
not at all. I mean, as you know, I qualified as a learning disabilities nurse. We were never taught about complexity in nursing. My brother's a social worker. He was never really taught about complex cases. You're taught about kind of generic cases, and I'm not saying that's exclusively for every single university across the UK, but there isn't enough sort of around the complexities. You don't have often those commissioners that specialise in complex support, and you can feel it as a provider. It's very frustrating at times where we have to take risk. We're not a risk-averse company. We have very, very complex people living in the community. we've got to take risk. Life has lots of risk in it. It's no different for the people we support. So yeah, it's a very frustrating thing, and actually you can lose contracts in this sector as a result of that, because there's too many safeguards. The reality is no, that's not true, and it's not how it should be seen. So education is a big one for me, just answering your question. There has to be more education around this for people, for any professionals working into this sector. That includes landlords, that includes aggregators, that includes housing associations. There just needs to be more education around this.
One of the things you were talking about was about the terminology that people use, and what would you say around that?
We're very passionate about using the right terminology. We don't use service user, we don't use customer, we don't use clients. We use the person supported, or the person's name, of course. We teach this within our induction. It's part of our culture. Many years ago, there was a study done where it was with people with disabilities, and it was kind of, what do you like to be called? And the actual name that people hated the most was service user, because it reminded them of drug user. So people with disabilities tell us what they don't want to be called, yet you have local authorities, you have CQC, you have the hospitals calling people service users. So it almost is like, well, what's the point in giving people a voice if they're not going to be heard? So we're very, very sort of passionate about using the right terminology, and part of supported living is integration. It's about supporting people to integrate into the community, and you're not going to achieve that if you're using negative terminology. And we feel those types of descriptions are wrong, and we should avoid them. We even when we're working with CQC and they'll say, please tell us about your service user, we'll correct the terminology and we'll tell you about the person supporting. Obviously, it doesn't go down fantastically well, but actually, if we're going to drive this culture, and there are some wonderful companies out there that do that, and they do use the right terminology, but there's also, in my opinion, too many professionals that don't use this terminology, and this all makes a big impact on successful community living. We've got to get the terminology right. So that's how
I think people are scared as well. People are really, because there's such a focus on using the right terminology in a whole range of different groups, aren't there? Sometimes it can be a bit terrifying to even think, what should you use? And
it's PC, isn't it? PC code map, isn't it? Yeah, I understand.
It is,
totally.
But I think you're right. The person's name, or the other thing I do is I listen to what everyone else is using. What's the word that they're using to describe the person, and then mirror that terminology. If like you say, ask the person if they're able, if you're there with them. But
there's some very sort of, I suppose it'd be seen as old school training now, but I still think is very relevant, which is social valorization. So some of the older school nurses will know what that is, and it looks at a range of issues, but one of which is terminology and the power of terminology, and the power of kind of if you portray someone in a negative light, what that can do to the person. And why that's important in housing in particular, and kind of setting that service up, is actually, if you're putting that person into a pigeonhole where it's a negative stance almost, by the time they've got to the property, they're already in negative situation. It's difficult to explain, but you kind of want to empower the person. You want to support the person to move into the property, and kind of, they're not the service user that's moving in. No, they're Bob that's moving in. And that's the difference. And it sounds simple, but it makes a massive impact on the person that you're supporting. So in the first instance, we'll always use the person's name, but if we're ever referring to someone in a document and it can't be a name, it'll be the person supported, and that will never change for us as a company, because it shouldn't.
And housing is an issue for individuals like this, I guess, that you're supporting. What kind of properties are you generally looking for when you're?
Housing is one of the biggest issues for us in supported living. I mean, one of the reasons I became a nurse was to get people out of hospital, and to understand the hospital system and things like that. The two biggest aspects to supported living for us is staffing and housing. Staffing is hard enough anyway at the moment, but housing is still equally as hard. The second you say to an estate agent or a landlord, the person has a learning disability, discrimination exists, and they won't admit to that, but it does. Then you add on the bit that they're coming out of prison, they have severe challenging behaviour, they're coming out of hospital. I've had phones put down on me before. I've had all sorts of situations. What you tend to find then is there'll be a house somewhere in not a very nice part of the city, that only housing benefit can afford. And actually, where they are in the community is incredibly important. If you're putting them into an area which isn't that nice and doesn't really meet their needs, it's an uphill battle straight away. So my issue at the moment is aggregators have seen a space here where they've moved in on it with supported living companies, and they are asking supported living companies to sign service level contracts or service level agreements and saying, we'll buy all these houses for you and you can have them wherever you want, but you guarantee the rent. It's a dangerous model, because it doesn't meet the REACH standards. There should be a separation between supported living and housing, but it can put a supported living company under. If that person moves out, they've got to keep paying the rent on that service. It shouldn't be like that. If Bob moves into a house and is supported by Seco support and doesn't want Seco support anymore, he shouldn't lose his home.
That's the whole point of supported living.
It's exactly that. It's not a residential model, it's supported living. And actually, if you've got the two tied up together, it's wrong. And it shouldn't be allowed. And I know it's very much frowned upon, but it shouldn't just be frowned upon, it should be stopped. We don't have that here. There is a separation. If Bob doesn't want us anymore as a provider, Bob shouldn't have us as a provider. But he shouldn't lose his home.
No.
So
it's getting that proper separation between the care and the tenancy arrangements, isn't it? And
I think, yeah, and I think that there are some fantastic housing associations out there that we work with, and they're very ethical, and we won't work with any housing associations that aren't. But there are also aggregators out there who shall remain nameless, but have, in my opinion, really affected the sector negatively. They've kind of come in and taken all the meat off the bone and left, and sort of everyone's picking up the pieces now.
I think for some people listening, they're not going to be familiar with that term aggregator, Simon. So how would you describe what an aggregator is? For
me, an aggregator is a middleman. They connect the people. So a lot of these aggregators use I don't know if it's REIT funds or right funds. I'm not sure how.
REIT, I pronounce it REIT, but real estate investment trusts, aren't they?
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, so they'll kind of they'll use, say, pension pot money to source lots of houses, and they'll connect the companies, and they'll get commissioners to sign off on it, and they're kind of putting everything together. That's my. I don't know if that's how you would view it.
Yeah, I think that's a good way. And they generally are adding, from a property perspective, they're adding value to the property by putting a lease on the property, and then they're making the profit on the upsell from that, aren't they? I think is probably a simple way of explaining it.
And there's been a lot of money. That's not kind of shock on the issue. These companies are in the hundreds of millions. Some of these aggregators. So there's a lot of money to be made. The problem is, the supported living companies are put at a huge risk. And don't get me wrong, I'm not going to sit here and say I've never considered it. When I ran another supported living company, I absolutely looked at it. I didn't get it. I didn't understand it at the time. I was given the sales pitch. We can get you 50 houses and no problems and blah, blah. I didn't realise actually what I was signing up to until I kind of looked at it properly and brought a solicitor in. I was like, oh my God, I'm not doing that, because but actually at the time, it's sold to you as because housing is such a huge issue in the sector. It's massive.
And the people you're supporting, and you want to get them into the right homes, and someone's offering you the opportunity to buy this perfect property for someone, you can really see why people sign into it,
Of course. And very much you were trying to get people out of hospital. This is a big drive to solve that problem, and sort of, here you go, here's 50 houses, crack on. It's the aftermath of it. It's the fact that Bob can't move out, can't lose you as a provider. I mean, it's too connected, it's too intertwined, and it needs to stop. We absolutely don't believe that. We don't do any of that in Seco support. It's very independent, and it always will be for us. Yeah.
And I think it's making people aware of that model, because when you speak to providers who have got signed into them, I've spoken to people who've taken on roles where there've been a 42-year lease in place. It's just. It's for a property that's no longer fits anybody's needs, but they have to keep paying it. It's the sort of thing that makes, like you said, businesses go under,
It really does. So the solution for us really is, we go to good housing associations. They find land, they find investors that are willing to work with us, and they are out there. The investors do exist.
I know lots of them. There's lots of good ones around.
They are out there, but then you kind of. But the problem with that is it's slow to get people out of hospital. So there's lots of people stuck in hospital that shouldn't be there. And we all know that. But actually, if there was a more sort of effective system in place, a quicker system, we'd get people out of hospital a lot quicker, you know. And I think this sits also with the local authorities, you know, with housing. There's lots of voids out there. There's lots of houses with local authorities where kind of they're empty and things. And I think there should be like a drive of, well, actually, every one of those could be used, you know, for the people we support. I just think it's very disconnected, the system, and it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
So, you know, and a support living CEO shouldn't have to sign up to something in which they're putting their company at significant risk. You're already, particularly in complex support, you're already putting yourself at risk by supporting complex people in the community. You're then putting your business at risk by signing up to these ludicrous leases and SOCs. And I just think it needs to stop. You know, someone has to come in and address this. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's about supply. And I think, but also the kind of properties that you're looking for, probably, if I've got this correct, for the individuals you're supporting, are probably quite expensive properties. They're probably more sort of detached bungalows in nicer areas. And
well, we only do single placements. If we did 2 people, it would be because they want to live together, not because it's cheaper for the local authority, if I'm being brutally honest. And you know, we're dealing with people with, for instance, people with autism, you know, sensory issues. Actually, a single placement is often what the person needs, and you can dictate the colours, the smells, everything in there, and that's really important to the person. You then get these ridiculous arguments of, well, no, people need to live together so they can make friends. Well, I don't live with my friends, you know. Actually integrate into the community, you know, go and meet people. That's how we make friends. So, you know, you don't need to live with people. That's an easy argument for a local authority to make, because it justifies grouping people together, and it's cheaper on support then, isn't it? So you're almost up against it as a provider anyway. You're almost against the people that are commissioning you. You're kind of having to justify, and we continuously have to justify single placements. But actually, we have the evidence and the proof to show it works. We're dealing with people that have been in and out of hospital regularly, all the time, constantly in and out. Actually, do a single placement, get it right for the person, get the environment bang on, and the difference is humongous for that person's life. But we shouldn't have to argue that. You know, people should understand it's a model that works.
And there's enough research around it as well.
There is. Yeah,
it's not like it's a new concept.
But it's cheaper to put 10 people in a big care home. Being brutally honest, it's because then you have incidental support, you can do deals and that kind of stuff. It doesn't make it right. Just because it's cheaper, it doesn't make it right, and it's not something we'll sign up to. I've worked in those homes. I would never do it, and this company will never do it. We are specialists in single placements. There is a reason why single placements are good. They're not for everyone, and it would be wrong of me to say every single person should be in their own home. And some people want to be living with other people. I understand that, but there's many times where that's not the case, but it's justified by the local authority that they should be living with other people. We've just had a situation where they wanted 2 people to live together. They offered us both the contracts, and they said they never met each other in their whole lives. Well, come on, like, you know, and actually they agreed in the end when we gave them the evidence and we gave them the rationale as to actually these are 2 complex people that we're now doing 2 single placements. But you also have the situation where you have new risk. If you have 2 very risky people living together, you have a new risk. I've had it with offending behaviour before. You put 2 sex offenders in a house together, you can create new offending behaviours and things. So there's lots and lots of other things that aren't considered enough when you're doing that model. So I'm sure you can hear we're very much for the single placement model.
But I think there's evidence for it. And obviously I can hear people listening thinking, yeah, but that sounds really expensive. That sounds like that would just be far more expensive. Should we not just have everyone in hospital? Actually, if people have this level of complexity, shouldn't they all be in hospital? What would you say to that argument, Simon?
It's a lot cheaper than the hospital. Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot cheaper. I'd love to have the exact figures for you now, but it's cheaper. There's no doubt about it. The upfront cost of doing the property and things might be a bit expensive, but it absolutely will save money in the long run. So no, it's just not a true argument. It's cheaper to be in the community.
And we also we know, like, you've got evidence of it. It's happened in properties that I've done. You get the property right, you get the environment right, and you get the support right. The support needs drop and reduce over time, don't they, if things are right?
The problem, absolutely that, and the biggest issue around that is authorities are very, very protective of their budget. So it's not what you're describing is exactly right. So it's kind of actually you'll save money in the long run, because actually the person does well, they don't need as much support, then they reduce their support and you save money. But it's the here and now budget they're looking at. I always have to remind commissioners, it's from central government. It's all one pot of money. It just comes, but it's not how they look at it. And actually, we have that issue all the time. If I'm being honest, we will save you money in the long run. It's a cost reduction model in many ways, because commissioners like to hear the words reduction and cost reduction, things like that. But it's the here and now cost, and they don't like it, and that's the issue. You've got to sell. You can probably hear we continuously have to justify and sell ourselves for something that we shouldn't have to go through that much effort to justify this. It's a proven model that works. That's
really frustrating for you to have to keep going over that all the time.
And you can see why companies go under. You can see why companies go under or choose to kind of put themselves out of business, because it's hard work, and we're the first to be blamed when anything goes wrong, so it's kind of we've got very good here at kind of standing up for ourselves and standing up for the people we support and advocating for the people we support and making sure that they get what they need and not kind of they're just given. Our support teams are bespoke, they're for the person, the property they have is for the person. It's very much everything's for the person. You give the person the greatest shot at staying in the community again and not going back to hospital, not going back to prison, where it'd be a lot more expensive for the taxpayer. So
yeah. Oh, Simon, thank you. It's been really brilliant chatting to you. We could just keep talking for hours, I know, but I'm conscious of time. So thank you. We'll drop your contact details in the show notes. If people want to get hold of you, then they can find where to find you will be in there. And thank you very much.
No problem, sir. Thank you.
Thanks.